So beautiful, just like your mother's.
Come down upon me and fill me with yourself.
Hi, Studio Recapped here. Today, we're going to talk about a movie called The Other Lamb in the horror and mystery genres. Spoiler alert is on. Watch out and take care. You won't believe how much your support means. Thank you so much for your support. This film is full of symbolism and metaphors, requiring deep contemplation. At the beginning of the movie, we see two girls dressed in identical blue outfits sitting by a waterfall. Then, they walk through a forest and reach a small village whose location is unknown. As the story progresses, we see many women and girls wearing the same kind of clothing. They perform daily tasks together and sing in unison. It doesn't take long to realize that all the women in blue belong to a shepherd, and he is the only man in his large and crowded family. After dinner, the shepherd chooses one of his wives to spend the night with. For the women, being chosen by the shepherd was a great honor. Before going to sleep, they pray and express gratitude for his mercy and kindness. The next morning, we see the shepherd giving a speech to the women. He performs a ritual that is truly unsettling. He dips his hand into a sheep's blood and smears it on the faces of the women and girls. During his speech, tears well up in the eyes of one of the girls named Selah. In reality, the shepherd was the leader of a cult made up entirely of women who were all under his rule and control, worshipping him like a god. He called all his wives sisters, and every woman bore him daughters. This, in his eyes, was his ultimate gift to them. Selah's mother had died while giving birth to her. After admiring the shepherd's sermons, Selah asks him about her mother, but he doesn't answer. He simply caresses her. Then we see one of his youngest wives, a girl named Eloise. She tells Selah and another girl how the shepherd gave her life meaning through his touch and intimacy, claiming it was a blessing from God. One of the girls becomes jealous that Eloise, who is the same age as them, was chosen as the shepherd's wife, and she speaks to her harshly. Selah defends Eloise, and this leads to an argument between them, which soon turns into a physical fight. At that moment, one of the wives, who is the girl's mother, intervenes and separates them. The woman orders Selah to take the leftover food to the cabin, and Selah obeys. As she walks through the forest, everything seems mysterious, with strange symbols all around. Selah comes across the corpse of a bird, crawling with worms. In the cabin, there was a strange woman named Sarah. Her appearance was messy and unkempt. She was a cursed woman. Her punishment was isolation. Sarah mocks the devotion and faith the women and girls have toward the shepherd and tells Selah, "You look a lot like your mother." But Selah sees her as impure and wants nothing to do with her. That evening, the girls ask their sisters and mothers to tell them a story. But they aren't allowed. Only the shepherd has the right to tell stories. Unable to sleep, Selah looks out the window and sees one of the women heading to a cabin, where she approaches the shepherd, engaging in an unknown act with him. The next day, Selah is deep in thought while the wives are bathing the shepherd. They remind him that soon their flock will have new lambs. The women are forbidden from contaminating the newborn lambs with impurity, so Selah is given the honor of performing sacred duty. She's completely inexperienced for this task. Later, Selah lies on a mountain, and when she wakes up, she discovers that a newborn lamb has been killed by a hunting dog. At that very moment, she realizes that she has gotten her first period, marking her transition into womanhood. She hides this from everyone and says nothing. One of the sisters asks, "What happened to the lamb?" Selah admits that she fell asleep, but a wild dog attacked and killed it. Contrary to expectations, the shepherd does not punish her, but instead forgives her and treats her with kindness. However, Selah is overcome with guilt, believing that the lamb's death was caused by her impurity. She has never seen anything beyond this world and blindly believes in the shepherd. That night, Selah is awake when she notices a police officer approaching the shepherd. The officer warns him that he must leave immediately or face imprisonment. The next day, the shepherd tells his beloved flock that they must leave, or else sinful people will separate them. He lies down and reassures them, saying, "We will find a better home." Girls and sisters lift him off the ground and rejoice. Meanwhile, Selah is upset, knowing they will never return. The shepherd tells her, "I rely on you more than anyone, because your faith is the purest among the flock." They quickly begin their journey to find a new home. After traveling a long distance, they stop to rest, and the shepherd starts another sermon. We see Sarah sitting far away, looking deeply sad. That night, Selah has a disturbing dream. She sees women drowning in water. Then, she envisions the shepherd and a sacrificed lamb. The next morning, the shepherd and his flock continue their journey, passing by an abandoned house. Some of the sisters decide to explore it and settle there, but the shepherd refuses, saying the house is filled with the memories of impure and sinful people. Instead, they set up camp elsewhere and begin singing together. Slowly, we notice a shift in Selah's mindset and behavior. She returns to the abandoned house and is drawn to a painting of a landscape on the wall. It seems as if the image has triggered a memory within her. At that moment, she notices one of the sisters standing beside her, and she is terrified. On the girl's body, there were bruises that clearly showed they were from the shepherd. Women and girls considered Selah to be impure. The next day, while walking, Selah walked beside Sarah. We see later that mothers look at the shepherd with envy as he loved younger women. It seemed that to the shepherd, women had an expiration date and became worthless after that. Sarah says, "The shepherd thinks I'm the most worthless woman." Sarah remembers Selah's mother well. She was very beautiful and was one of the first to join the flock. After giving birth to her daughter, she was in bad health, but the shepherd said it was a test of her faith and wouldn't let her be taken to the hospital, and the woman died. After realizing this, Selah felt empty. She imagined herself like an ordinary teenager, getting in a car and watching the flock from afar. But in reality, she was part of the flock. Her understanding was growing, and she was starting to understand the harsh and dark truths. This realization made her cry. She was no longer herself. Sarah told Selah about her life. She had been the shepherd's favorite woman, but her sense of pride and freedom had caused her trouble. She always wanted to go to the forest and the waterfall to feel freedom, but the shepherd wouldn't allow it, and after a while, she became worthless. However, she never decided to leave the flock because she feared what awaited her. Sarah warned Selah and says that the shepherd's behavior toward everyone changes after a while. The next day, the flock sets off again. The women scold and condemn Selah for spending time with the exiled wife. The shepherd also tells Selah that Sarah is the most worthless woman in the flock and to stay away from her. While traveling, one of the sisters begins labor. Everyone asks her to give birth right there. The woman disagrees, but she has no choice. While I hear the woman screams, they wait for the baby. A boy was born, but the pregnant woman passed away. Her daughter cried by her mother's body and wouldn't leave her, but the shepherd pushed the baby aside. Sarah calls the shepherd by his real name for the first time, Michael. The shepherd burns the woman's body, and Selah stays there for a long time thinking. Sarah takes care of a baby and decides to leave the flock to keep the baby, whom the shepherd wanted to abandon. It seemed that this baby had given her the courage to be free. In fact, it should only be one ram in the flock, meaning the flock only wanted one man, and that was the shepherd. Therefore, the boy and any other man had no place in this cult, and women were not supposed to have sons. Sarah asks Selah for help and says she is the strongest, so she should keep an eye on the flock and try to save it. Soon, the women were tired and wanted to rest. One of the women could no longer walk and fell to the ground. The shepherd punished her in front of everyone, calling her worthless and started beating her. The poor woman cried without protest. The shepherd's brutality was becoming more evident to Selah. They reached a new place, a beautiful mountain lake. The shepherd baptized the whole flock. Each of the women considered this a great honor, except for Selah. The shepherd no longer had any sacred feelings for her, and in fact, hated her. When the shepherd dipped Selah in the water, he kept her underwater longer than anyone else. She saw around her the bodies of other women in white clothes. That night, after everyone gathered by the fire, they went to their tents to sleep. The shepherd came to Selah's tent and called her in. When she went to him, he asked her to untie her hair. The shepherd said again, "You're more beautiful than your mother." At first, he treated her kindly, but then with seriousness, he got closer to her and assaulted her. After he was done, he wished her good night. The next day, Selah decided to tell a story to the others. She didn't care that only the shepherd was allowed to tell stories. She tells the story of Sarah's life to the wives and daughters. Sarah was a rebellious woman who eventually learned she needed to be free. Selah made the others understand that they too needed to break free from their ignorance. After a while, the girls noticed there was no trace of their mothers. No matter how much they searched, they couldn't find them. They saw the shepherd by the water with their mother's clothes scattered around him. In reality, the shepherd had strangled all his women to be with the younger girls and build a younger flock, and he turned to the girls and said it had to be his way. The girls were scared and kept asking about their mothers. The shepherd called Selah his wife and asked her to come to him so he could show her his kindness and mercy. But the girl declared that the shepherd and his mercy were no longer valuable to her. The shepherd slapped her for this insolence. Selah, in return, courageously slapped the shepherd, and that was the beginning of the path to freedom. In the next scene, we see the police find the shepherd's body, which had been avenged by his daughters. Now the girls are free and live by a waterfall. This movie has a powerful message about the abuse of power and psychological control in cults and individual awakening. It shows how charismatic leaders can manipulate others into submission. The character of Selah symbolizes resistance and awareness against male dominance. The film emphasizes that true freedom requires breaking the chains of fear and blind obedience. Ultimately, the main message of the film is that liberation from control is only possible through awareness and courage. Freedom is the right of all humans,